Hi again, Keith Bond here from Bond Christian Counseling, wanting to cover uh, the addiction cycle with you today. And before I do, I want to touch on a couple of things. First off, the most of this material will come from uh, author Chip Dodd, who's got a book out called Hope in the Age of Addiction. And he has worked with addictions in Center for Professional Excellence is the name of the facility he created. I don't believe he operates it now anymore, but um, this premise would say that all of us are actually addicted. There's two kinds of people in the world: those who are active in their addiction and those who are active in their recovery. And so, if we can't tell our story with the feelings attached, then we're going to be active in our addiction. So, we are created as emotional and spiritual creatures, created by a relational God for relationship, meaning we will attach to something. We are created to attach, ideally, attach to one another in relationship, because that's how we're made in the DNA of how God made us. And so, if we can't successfully have relationships with others and attach to other people, then we will still attach to something. And when I have abandonment after abandonment after abandonment of every time I tell the truth about my feelings, I get left all by myself. And so pretty soon, I discovered that the human is the only animal created that can actually deny the way that it's made. And so when we deny our feelings, it means that we push our feelings away, and then we're not going to be aware of our needs. And then I'm going to get those needs met in illegitimate ways, apart from God and apart from others. So we will attach to something if we don't choose to feel and deal. And that's how the addiction recovery is going to be in two parts. One is like detox, a recovery from a behavior. And then the other part is recovery of your heart. Because why did I start getting the need for relief through addictive behavior or relief seeking behavior, counterfeit fulfillments? It's because I didn't have and or lost my heart. And I lost my heart in those emotional relational abandonments, typically of our primary caregivers. So, another thing to understand is that the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection. And so we need to be able to tell our stories with the feelings attached. So this is the addiction cycle. Let me find it here. I'm going to read this paragraph to you. Basically, it says, addiction traps a person in a repetitive compulsion that is controlled by the core desire to handle life's daily events without having to deal and feel with unwanted emotions. All addictive processes follow a rather rigid pattern of attempts to escape unwanted emotional experiences. A person trapped in the cycle of addiction lives in a preoccupation and obsession with control, develops predictable patterns to ease anxiety, and eventually seek relief from the tension with some form of acting out using some mood-altering self-cure, something outside of me to make myself okay on the inside. And that's how I've learned how to self-regulate in a reactive way. Afterwards, the person eventually develops despair around their powerlessness over the self-cure. And their only recourse besides recovery is to make promises that they know how to keep, but only by the use of their willpower or their intellect or their morality. And those are, when they're from the flesh, those are actually are the fuel of my flesh, and that leads me back into more codependence and more performance through the path of self-esteem, because it having to require control over events of life, which starts the cycle of addiction in a person all over again. So the eventual effect of avoidance leads to a progressive denial, life-damaging consequences, and a deep inner contempt. And so life is going to happen, and there's some kind of event that happens internally or externally where I get triggered. And then us adults have this temporary amnesia where we forget about being autonomous and we forget the way that we were originally made, and we just react. And so my preoccupation begins. So pre means before, occupation means living. So basically it says before I can live, then I have to look outside of me to get something outside of me, and then I can be okay on the inside. And then my rehearsal or scenarios or conversations, interactions after the fact, those are rituals. It's the last point before the behavior itself can become risky and or dangerous, such as acting out. This principle called, that's just where I put my notes there, but called chunking. This is like if I was to ask you to tie your shoes and you'd be like, okay, do, and you did it. But really, there's like 50 steps inside of that. But our brains chunked all those 50 steps together. And trauma is like that, where we have to unchunk the memories so that they can be let out. And if we don't sit in it and be still and quiet and feel and deal, then we won't actually be able to let out any of the bad. And so all of this is a pattern where we just react but our body, our mind, will, and emotions are kicking in. And then finally, there's acting out, doing the relief-seeking behavior, alcohol, drugs, pornography, cutting, etc. It could be work, it could be exercise, could be anything, whatever I've attached to. Then after I act out, then I fall into this despair and the feeling of utter hopelessness that addicts have about their behavior and their powerlessness, and thus creates this worldly sorrow for yet another failure, which is just remorse. And so I'm sad that I failed, and then I got more, maybe some consequences, but not necessarily sad that I sinned against God like David, but worldly sorrow, sad that I got caught. Then I make some promises to myself, promises of like trying harder in my willpower, or just doing better in my morality, or figuring it out in my intellect. But I go back into my codependency. And this is real important, because when I try to push myself through into the sobriety, their phraseology is like, I force myself. It's like forcing the inner child to get it done by my grown-up willpower, i.e., potty training at gunpoint. And so what this actually means is that my relationship with my younger developmental parts comes in here. And if I don't get me, and if I don't understand my trauma, then in some kind of a way, the present day grown-up me is going to be beating up the traumatized childhood me, where I have gotten abandoned and I lost my heart, I lost my voice, and I just started surviving. And that's progressive, but the gist is, instead of beating that part up, which is going back into the addiction cycle, I need to actually recover my relationship with that part and actually lay claim to that part, and then kind of get on that part's team and take responsibility for that younger part and for myself. Because what I will eventually face is that my caregivers abandon me, yes, but then every time I beat myself up, I abandon me too. I abandon the younger me too. And I need to give him a break and get on his side and take care of him. So I push through with my willpower, and then eventually some event happens, internal or external trigger, and then I go back into the cycle. Now, this offshoot right here is how I can get off of the addiction cycle. Now, everybody, humans, were made as children. They have the desperation of hope and the courage to express it. And so biblically, we would recognize this phraseology of the old man is his desires of the flesh are to just survive. And that's taken me back into the cycle of I just going to survive through my independence or self-sufficiency or codependence or even quid pro quo, where it's interdependence. And right here, I do have the free will that I need to make my decision, but us adults have that temporary amnesia where we just go back into do what we do. But right here is the split, the desire of the flesh and the desire of the spirit, because there is a split at desire. And that's why we are at war with ourselves and with God. And so I can choose to, whichever one of those I choose to feed is going to thrive. Whichever one of those I choose to starve is going to die. And I choose now to feed the new man, the spiritual man, and starve the old man. I choose to feed the desires of the spirit, and I choose to crucify and starve the desires of the flesh, the old man, to survive. And that means that I have to engage in the struggle again to feel and deal. And I struggle towards health, back to how I was made, and then start telling the truth with my face instead of hiding behind the different masks that I've learned to cover my feelings and not be in need. And so the spiritual root system says that those roots back in Jeremiah 17, 1 through 10, are the feelings and the needs, the desires, the longings, and hopes. And so the sobriety itself means that I use the tools of working the steps, of going to meetings, of meeting with a sponsor. And then abstinence is when I don't get any payoff, any like internal hit of dopamine, because it's sobriety plus abstinence, which equals recovery. And then I can find myself living fully, loving deeply, and leading well. But I cannot do that alone. In fact, relapse is a part of sobriety, because we have to step into the realities of I'm a work in progress. Like I'm a lifelong learner, but it takes a lifetime to learn these things. And even on my best day, I can be just a giraffe on ice. Like I am clumsy, I am stumbling, bumbling, but always falling forward as I surrender to the process of the way that I'm made and my feelings. Not that this whole process isn't saying that feelings are the end result. They're not God. They're not the goal. They are just a tool that God has given us to live fully in this tragic world, because life is tragic and God is faithful. And so now we will be living out the Psalms where David cried out, God, I'm hurt, I'm lonely, I'm sad, everybody wants to kill me. This hurt, get me out of here. And yet I will still choose to worship a God who wants to be with a guy like me. So thank you for watching. I hope that was a blessing, and there's always more to learn and dig into. So thank you for sharing this time with me. God bless.